Hi, my name is Debbie Knapp. My TDOC number is 97664. I've been where you are, not necessarily in Henning because Henning wasn't open. I went to Tennessee Department of Corrections in TPW in 1982. In 1974, my first husband and I separated. After I was married. I married when I was 16, left home when I was 15, had 2 children. We were living off of our friends, family, in the church because he didn't work. He was lazy, and he always had problems finding a job. The big problem was the jobs don't come and knock on your door, and he didn't go knock on theirs. Once I realized that it was going to be up to me to take care of the children and myself, that he was not or could not do it, I went out and found a job. Dawned on me, why am I supporting a man? I'll just support me and the 2 kids. So I left him. Well, not long after that, I made friends with a couple of guys that came into the Smokey the Bear. It's like a 7-Eleven. And we started talking and hanging out and found out about smoking pot. And they were getting ready to join the military, and they were always kidding about it. And I laughed and told them that if I was going to go in the military, I was going to go Air Force so I could fly everywhere instead of walk or ride on a boat, which planted the seed. And I did go. I joined the Air Force. I did, when I was going to school is when I met my second husband, John. And he was in school and so was I. Well, he dropped out of school but continued to stay on base. And we dated. When I left Chinook Air Force Base and went to my home base, which is in Little Rock, Arkansas, John came with me. Wasn't long after that, I was pregnant with my 3rd child, active duty, and John was looking for jobs. So as we got more involved, he got more verbally abusive. And wasn't long after the initial verbally abuse, he got physically abusive. This was in 1974. In 1980, I had had all that I could take. I knew that it had to be one of us, either me or him. And I started thinking about ways out. Well, I had another friend who was more than willing to introduce me to her boyfriend and a friend of his. And I asked the friend of his to kill my husband. I tried to do a pay-for-hire killing, and he backed out. But he was willing to sell me the gun, which I did purchase from him. I really still at that point did not know if it was going to be John or me because I was so distraught. I was also very heavily self-medicated. The good thing about pot is it numbs you. So I did not feel, I did not hurt as bad. But when it numbs you, I also was not aware, or as aware as I should be, of the effect that it would have and how either my death or his death would affect our families, our children, and any of that. And I made a terrible decision. In April of 1980, I killed my husband. And I don't want to say I rejoiced because I didn't. I did have relief from his death because me and the children were no longer going to be abused. But on the other hand, I found out that I lost the man that I loved. And I talked about that in other times, but I loved John. I loved him with all of my heart. I made a commitment and I was willing to stand by it. I loved John, the good guy, and I missed him when he died. And I grieved. And while I was grieving, here I am. I had killed him. At that point, the police had not questioned me, but obviously they were looking into me, but they hadn't questioned me. But I was so distraught about what I had done, the reality of his death, that I couldn't deal. I couldn't sleep. When I did sleep, I had terrible nightmares, and I went through pretty much hell at the time. And the only comfort, if I can say there was comfort, was in my closet. I sat in the closet with a 45 and prayed that God would take my life. Now I'm thinking death. When I prayed and asked God to take my life, I was thinking death. And the 45 was there, but I had already seen the pain of John's death, how it affected not only me and my children, but his parents and even my mother, and knew that I had caused them all so much pain that if I died, it would just be for naught, and they would suffer even more. So, through the grace of God, I did not pull the trigger, not because I didn't want to. I guess it was just because I kind of put it off. But I did many, many times, and I'm talking over 2 weeks, a month, ask God to take my life. Well, many years later, it dawned on me that he really did, just not the way that I thought, not by death, but by change. And by change, he sent a attorney came to see me. I was in shock because I hadn't seen him in all that time, 6 months, only twice. And he told me that they had offered a plea of life in prison. And that was the best I could ever hope for. But I could take my chances and go to trial. And I thought, no, I don't want to go to trial, because the publicity had finally started dying down, and my mother and my kids were getting a little breath of air of a normal life. So I didn't want to cause pain again for them. So I took life in prison. Now, the attorney told me we were looking at 10 years. I'd go up for parole. I'd make parole because I wouldn't do anything to make it different, right? And I thought, okay, fine. So I took the time. I was transported to TPW 2 days before Thanksgiving in 1982. Went to the Little House, for those of you that remember the Little House, and looked around because I thought I had 10 years to do. In 10 years, I turned 30 a little over a month after I arrived in the Little House. 10 years was a long time. 10 years without my kids was almost unbearable. But so I thought, I'll find somebody that I can do time, show me how to do time. So once I got out of the Little House and I was out in population, I started talking to all of the different women to find out who had done 10 years or close to 10 years and how they did it, and basically to teach me the ropes, because all of y'all know life is totally different on the inside than it is on the out. The hierarchy is a whole lot different. The staff is one thing, but the inmates and all of the little groups is entirely another thing. And that was my world. Those were my people. And I needed to know how to do time. So I interviewed inmates. Who else do you talk to? Well, I didn't find anybody that I wanted to do time like. I found a lot of people who were bitter and angry. It was the man's fault or the woman's fault or whoever they had committed the crime with or felt like they had to do the crime for. Or it was the institution's fault that what they were doing really should not be against the law, but it was. So I found a lot of bitter, angry people. I didn't find anybody that I truly wanted to be like. So here I am. I got out. I had help. I got my first job, scared to death, to go up for an interview, and I went to work at the public library. And I was entry level, and I worked in distribution, which means I carted all of those books that came in and took them up, put them in order by the Dewey Decimal System, and put them on shelves for people to come and pick and take home and read and enjoy. That was my first job, and I was lucky and blessed to get it. Well, I moved on from there and went to work for a cleaning company, and I was an assistant manager, and that was pretty cool. I kind of liked it, but I always wanted different. I wanted to move up. I wanted to use the skills that I had learned. So I started looking for another job. Well, in the meantime, my friend, who I was still living with 3 years later, had a family crisis and needed to move to Virginia. Well, that was pretty scary to me, to think that the stability that I had found was going to be gone, and they were going to move to Virginia, her and her family, and I was going to be here or there in Memphis, and I wouldn't have that stability. So I was afraid again. But things change. So when I do talk to groups as much as I can, and there's usually 3 truths that I tell, but for y'all I'm going to add an extra one. There are 4 truths. One is that after I had been out of prison for almost 3 years, that I would have the opportunity to make a DVD for the YWCA. I really wanted to be able to go into the safe homes and talk to the battered women and tell them, you don't want to do what I did. You have better opportunities. I had no one to go to, but you do. Here are the different programs. Here are the things. And this is the reason why you don't want to go to prison. You don't want to fight back. But they wouldn't let me. They wouldn't let me into the safe home because I have a criminal background. Kind of funny, huh? I'm trying to tell them they don't want to do what I did, don't follow in my footsteps, and they're telling me, no, you can't go see them because you have a criminal background. So one of the ladies offered to do a DVD, which is out there, and one of these days when y'all get out, you can go to YouTube and check it out. But that DVD was made and aired. The first time that it was ever seen was at the Civil Rights Museum, and it was on the day that I left Memphis to move to Virginia. So that was the first truth, that If you had told me 15 years ago that I would make a DVD and that it would be seen at the Civil Rights Museum on the day that I left to move to Virginia, I would tell you you were crazy. I don't know anybody in Virginia. But I do now, and I did at that point when I moved, of course. So that was, moving is the second truth. I would have thought, there is no way. Why Virginia? I don't know anybody in Virginia. Virginia always seemed like it was a reach, I guess. I never thought about being so close to the capital, so close to the heart of our country, or that's what you hear all of the time. But I am, and I was lucky enough to be able to do that, to get an interstate compact as someone who has committed first-degree murder is pretty big. Pretty big. They just usually don't let murderers leave the state, but they did me. The third truth is that I would work for an attorney. Now, I don't know about y'all. Okay, I do know about y'all. We don't like attorneys much. Don't have very many good experiences with attorneys, especially court-appointed. So when I applied for the job here at Sensei, I didn't know it was owned by an attorney. And so when I applied, I came in and everything, did the interview, they offered me a position, and that's when I found out that I was going to be working for an attorney. And I was kind of a little concerned about that, but it has turned out to be a very good experience, and I'm happy that I jumped out of the box and went for it. I have a really nice job. As you can tell, I work in a nice place, and I owe it all to Ruth Bailey and the skills that she taught me. So that's one of the reasons why I recommend that you learn a skill. There are all types of opportunities there in prison. Learn from them. It'll reward you in the end, I promise. And the next truth is almost hard to tell y'all, because who do we hate worse than attorneys? Cops. Yep. So guess where I volunteer all of the time? 3-4 times a year, I get to go to the Fairfax County Academy, Police Academy, and talk to the recruits. And I tell them my story. Actually, they see the DVD that I was telling you about before, and it's called Pork Chop Day. I know, funny name, but they see it, and then I go in and I talk to them, and I try to share where I came from as a battered woman, where I went to prison, and hopefully how they can be the in-between those two and stop anybody else from doing what I did. That's my sole goal when I go in. I want them to be what the victim needs. And hopefully I can give them a voice, and they can understand how important it is how they treat the women or men, because men can be victims of violence and of abuse. So anyhow, I talk to them, and I really try to put a face, instead of just all the clinical that they learn, the laws and everything. I want them to know that we hurt, that we bleed, that we have needs. Yes, sometimes we commit crimes, but we are human beings.